Good morning, dear students. Welcome to our lecture on the subject classical and modern. This is our lecture, which is belonging to Neoclassical Period. Learn about Neoclassical Period and deeply understand what kind of authors was in this period and what kind of literary genres was famous among this period. So pay more attention or mission, which is will be helpful seminar classes and also exam. So okay, start before start about Neoclassical Period. I would like to show you the Neoclassical Period.
Hi! In this video we're going to talk about the Neoclassical Period of English literature. The Neoclassical Period was from 1660 to 1798, year when Wordsworth's lyrical ballads were published. In this period, people were trying to bring classical things back, like Roman and Greek, but in a new way. The Neoclassic Period is also called the Age of Reason, Period of Enlightenment, and Era of Logic. It is characterized by order, accuracy, and structure. The literature of this age included parody, essays, satire, letters, fables, melodrama, and rhyming with couplets. This period is divided in three stages: Restoration Period, Augustan Period, and the Age of Johnson. In this video we're going to talk about each one of them, about some dates, people that were important, facts, and works that were published. First, the Restoration Period. It lasted from 1660 to 1689. The term is used to describe the period of time in which the English, Scottish, and Irish monarchies were restored to Charles II, and the years afterwards where a new political settlement was established. In poetry and drama, there was a lot of French and classical influence. Literature, as novels, biographies, history, travel writing, and journalism gained confidence during this period. Also, Restoration Period witnessed news become a commodity. The essay developed into periodical art form and the beginnings of textual criticism. In this period, we can find literary figures as John Dryden, who was the most relevant author of this period, Sir William Temple, John Locke, Samuel Pepys, Aphra Behn, Jean Racine, and Jean-Baptiste Poquelin. Some of the relevant works of this period are Alpha an Apologue and an Epilogue by John Dryden, Pilgrim's Progress by John Bunyan, Paradise Lost by John Milton, Sodom by Earl of Rochester, The Country Wife by William Wycherley, and Treatises of Government by John Locke. Then we have the Augustan Age. The Augustan Age is the period after the Restoration era to the death of Alexander Pope, the most relevant literary figure from this period that lasted from 1690 to 1744. This period is distinguished by its striving for harmony and precision, its urbanity, and its imitation of classical models as Virgil and Horace. The works published in this age exhibit qualities of order, clarity, and stylistic decorum. Also insisted that nature is the true model and a standard of writing. But we talk about nature not as the concept of flowers and animals, but as a rational and comprehensible moral order in the universe. This period relevant writers are Alexander Pope, John Dryden, Daniel Defoe, Jonathan Swift, John Gay, Joseph Addison, François Marie Poet de Voltaire, and Lady Marie Wortley Montagu. And some of the relevant works of this period were Rape of Lock, and The Dunciad by Alexander Pope, Gulliver's Travel and A Tale of a Theft by Jonathan Swift, Robinson Crusoe and A Journal of the Plague Year by Daniel Defoe, The Spectator by Joseph Addison and Richard Steele, and Beggar's Opera by John Gay. Now, the Age of Johnson. Finally, the last stage of the Neoclassical Period. The Age of Johnson, also called the Age of Transition or the Age of Sensibility, was a period that lasted from 1750 to 1798. In this period, older ideals were passing and newer ones were slowly emerging. The middle class was making its power felt in politics. The authority of the aristocracy was slowly weakening. George III was the one in charge, and American and French Revolution were happening. In the literature of this age, man was seen as an individual, and the authors were emphasizing on each individual's feeling and emotion. Also, new sources were discovered, like the Northern literature, which led to the use of mythological creatures unknown by the European public. This period has important authors like Samuel Johnson, Hester Lynch Thrale, Edward Gibbon, James Boswell, George Crabbe, Robert Burns, and Thomas Gray. And some of the relevant works of this period are Lives of Poets by Samuel Johnson, The Decline and Fall of the Roman Empire by Edward Gibbon, and Elegy Writing in a Country Churchyard by Thomas Gray. As we can see, the Neoclassical period was an age of reflection. People were praised wit and parody, but also was a time to be careful with the immoral appearances, because they were more valued than honesty. In my opinion, the Neoclassical period was a pretty interesting age. People begin to make reflections on the world that surrounds them, but also in themselves and their feelings. But it didn't stop there. They also criticize and make fun of all of that using the parody and satire. And I think that's an interesting way to make a reflection of such a deep and complex matter, that is to understand ourselves and the world.
Okay, students, I think some information about Neoclassical period. Let's continue. According to the Neoclassical period, there are three main ages here given. The first is the Restoration. It has longed from 1660 until 1700. The next one, the Augustan age. It has longed from 1700 until 1745. The last one is the age of sensibility. It has longed from 1745 until 1785. According to each period, a lot of information, what kind of authors, what kind of poets were there in these periods. So the Restoration period sees some response to the Puritan in the theatre. Restoration comedy is developed during this time under the talent of playwrights such as William Congreve and John Dryden. We can say William Congreve as a follower of John Dryden. So here given us some information about William Congreve. William Congreve shaped the English comedy of manners through his use of satire and a well-written dialogue. Congreve achieved fame in 1693 when he wrote some of the most popular English plays of the Restoration period. His first play was The Old Bachelor, written to amuse himself while convalescing, was produced at the Theatre Royal. Now, what can we say about John Dryden? So, John Dryden, he led the way in Restoration comedy. His best known work being Marriage à la Mode, as well as heroic tragedy and regular tragedy in which his greatest success was all for love. Uh, well known has written in 73. We have mentioned that about John Dryden and William Congreve have written satire, and now I would like to give a definition of what is satire. Satire is a way of using humor to show that someone or something is foolish, weak, bad, and etc. And second definition is humor that shows the weaknesses or bad qualities of a person. Satire too became quite popular in this period, and the best known authors was Samuel Butler. Here also given a explanation of satire is the art of making someone or something look ridiculous, raising laughter in order to embarrass, humble, or discredit its targets. As a well-known and notable writers, we can say that the Alfred Ben, John Bunyan, and John Locke. To be understandable, we try to give pictures of authors in the lecture. Now, after Restoration period, we have the Augustan Age. The Augustan Age was a time of Alexander Pope and Jonathan Swift, who limited those first Augustans and even drew parallels between themselves and the first set. Here given information that 18th century Alexander Pope and Jonathan Swift they were friends and rivals, and while they wrote on similar topics, their styles of satire were markedly different, even they have adapted them in this period. Another authors of this period, they were Lady Mary Wortley Mantua, and Daniel Defoe. Mary Wortley is a poet. She was a prolific and this time and noted for challenging stereotypically female roles. And the last author is Daniel Defoe. Maybe you have information about him because his well-known work was the Robinson Crusoe. Now about the age of sensibility. It's a vast age according to the Neoclassical Period. We know that this age had longer from 1745 and 1785. The age of sensibility, sometimes referred to as the age of Johnson in some information, and this period was a time of Edmund Burke, Edward Gibson, Hester Lynch Swale, James Boswell, and of course Samuel Johnson. Ideas such as neoclassicism, critical and literary mode, and the Enlightenment, a particularly world view shared by many intellectuals, were championed during this age. Novelists to explore include Henry Fielding, Samuel Richardson, Tobias Smollett, and Lawrence Sterne, as well as poets William Cowper and Thomas Pesci. Here given photos of Stuart period. Why we have put it here? Because restoration period corresponds with this period, with this Stuart period. The restoration of the English monarchy took place in the Stuart period. It began in 1660 when the English, Scottish and Irish monarchies were all restored under King Charles II. Charles II. This followed the interregnum, also called the Protectorate, that followed the Wars of the Three Kingdoms. What is the restoration? The term restoration is used to describe the actual event by which the monarchy was restored, and the period of several years afterwards in which a new political settlement was established. It is very often used to cover the whole reign of Charles II in the period 1660 and 1685, and often the brief reign of his younger brother James II. It's in a period of 1685 and 1688. In certain contexts, it may be used to cover the whole period of the later Stuart monarchs, as far as the death of Queen Anne and the accession of the Hanoverian George I in 1714. For example, restoration comedy typically encompasses works written as late as 1710. Now, what we know about restoration literature. Mainly, restoration literature is the English literature written during the historical period commonly referred to as the English Restoration, which corresponds to the last years of the direct Stuart reign in England, Scotland, Wales and Ireland. In general, the term is used to denote roughly homogeneous styles of literature that center of celebration or reaction to the restored court of the Charles II. According to the restoration literature, here given works of some authors. The first is Paradise Lost, which is a book of John Milton. The second is Earl of the Rochester Sodom. It is a work of John Wilmot. The third one is The Country of Life. It's a work of William. And the last one, The Pilgrim's Progress. It's a book of John Bunyan. These books mainly belonged to a restoration period. The dates for restoration literature are of convention and they differ markedly from genre to thus the restoration in a drama may last until 1700, while in poetry it may last only until 1666, and the Annus Mirabilis, and in prose it might end in 1688 with the increasing tensions over and the corresponding rise in journalism and the periodicals, or not until 1700 when those periodicals grew stabilized. In general, scholars use the term restoration to denote the literature that began and flourished under Charles II, whether that literature was the legendary or that gained a new life with restored aristocracy, the eschatological literature that showed an increasing despair among Puritans, or the literature of rapid communication and trade that followed in the wake of England's mercantile empire. Uh, the Restoration was an age of poetry. Not only was poetry the most popular form of literature, but was also most significant form of literature, as poems affected political events and immediately reflected the times. It was to its own people and age dominated only by the king, and not by only single genius. Throughout the period, the lyric, aerial, historical, and the epic poem was being developed. Even without the introduction of neoclassical criticism, English poets were aware that they had no national epic. Here given some authors' works. The first is Edmund Spenser's book Fairy Queen. The second one is The Song of Roland. The third one is Cantor Demiocritus. The last one is Aeneid, is a well-known work of in Italy, but there wasn't the very national epics, but several poets attempted to supply this void. As a Restoration period poets, we can say Sir William Davenant was the first Restoration poet to attempt an epic. His unfinished Ganjabet was epic length, and it was admired by hobbies. However, it also used the ballad form, and the other poets as well as critics were very quick to condemn this rhythm scheme, the ballad form. And the prefaces to Ganjabet shows the struggle for a formal epic structure, as well as how early Restoration saw themselves in relation to classical literature. Also, today he is studied separately from the Restoration period. John Milton's Paradise Lost, we said about above, it was published during the time Milton, no less than Davenant, wished to write the English epic and the close blank verse as his form. Milton rejected to the cause of English exceptionalism. His Paradise Lost seeks to tell the story of all mankind, and his part is in a Christianity rather than Englishness. Significantly, Milton began with an attempt at writing an epic on King Arthur, for that was a matter of English national funding. While Milton rejected that subject, in the end others made the attempt. Richard Blackmore wrote both the Prince Arthur and the King Arthur. Both attempts were long, soporific, and failed both critically and popularly. Indeed, the poetry was so slow that the author became known as Never-Ending Blackmore. The Restoration period ended without an English epic. Beowulf may be called the English epic, but the work was unknown to Restoration authors, and English was incomprehensible to them. Due to the poetry of this period, lyric poetry, in which the poet speaks of his or her own feelings in the first person and expresses a mood, was not especially common in the Restoration period. poets expressed their points of view in other forms, usually public or formally distinguished poetic forms such as odes, pastoral poetry, and aerial verse. One of the characteristics of the period is its devaluation of individual sentiment and psychology in favor of public utterance and philosophy. The source of the lyric poetry found later in the church poets would in the Restoration only exist as pastorals. Formally, the Restoration period had a preferred rhyme scheme. Iambic pentameter was by far the most popular structure for poetry of all types. Neoclassicism means that poets attempted adaptation of classical matters, but the rhyming couplet in the iambic pentameter held a near monopoly. According to Dryden, the rhyming couplet in the iambic pentameter has a right restraint and the dignity for a lofty subject, and its rhyme allowed for a complete, coherent statement to be made. Dryden was struggling with the issue of what later critics in the Augustan period would call decorum, the fitness of form of subject. It's the same struggle that Davern faced in his Gambit. Dryden's solution was a closed couplet in the iambic pentameter that would have a minimum enjambment. This form was called the heroic couplet because it was suitable for heroic subjects. Additionally, the age also developed the mock heroic couplet. After 1672, the Samuel Butler's Hudibras, according to Samuel Butler, we said above that according to Samuel Butler, his work iambic tetrameter couplets with unusual or unexpected rhymes become known as Hudibrastic verse. It was a formal parody of heroic verse, and it was primarily used for satire. Jonathan Swift would use the Hudibrastic form almost exclusively for his poetry. Also, Dryden's reputation is that today contemporaries saw the 1670s and the 1680s as the age of courtier poets in the general, and Edmund Wallace was prized as any. Dryden, Rochester, Buckingham, and Dorset dominated verse, and all were attached to the court of Charles, Afraben, Matthew Prior, and Robert Gould. By contrast, were outsiders who were profoundly royalist. The court poets follow no one particular style, except that they all show sexual awareness and willingness to satirize and dependence upon which to dominate their opponents. Each of these poets wrote the stage as well as the page. Of this band, Dryden, Rochester, and could deserve some separate mention. Dryden was prolific, and he was often accused of plagiarism both before and after his narrative. He wrote public odes. He attempted the Jacobin pastoral along the lines of Walter Raleigh and Philip Sidney, but his greatest fame came from his attempts at apologetics for the court and the established church. A well-known work of John Dryden was MacFlacknoy. Dryden's MacFlacknoy set up the historical parody, and the work of John Dryden was the hint and the partner. Dryden attempted to serve the court, and the hint and the partner prized the Roman Church above all others. After Dryden suffered for his conversation, he was a victim of satires. About the work of Alpha Ben. Alpha Ben modeled the Wake Wilmore in her play, and the Rover on Rochester, the work of Alpha Ben, and while she was best known publicly for her drama, in the 1670s only Dryden's plays were staged more often than hers. Ben wrote a great deal of poetry that would be basis of her later reputation. Also, we can consider the 18th century as a development of modern novel. The 18th century saw the development of modern novel as a literary genre. In fact, many candidates for the first novel in English date from this period, of which Daniel Defoe's 1790 Robinson Crusoe is probably the best known. Now, I'd like to show you a video about Robinson Crusoe and Daniel Defoe's biography about his career and life, and also some information about Robinson Crusoe, his Daniel.
Robinson Crusoe was a blockbuster novel, the most famous and widely printed work of author Daniel Defoe. The timeless story of self-reliance and survival on a deserted island is older than America itself, and while the contexts of its time period remain dated and often problematic, Robinson Crusoe holds up as an innovative, wildly popular, critically acclaimed novel that remains influential and beloved today. Author Daniel Defoe was born in London on September 13, 1660. He studied to become a Presbyterian minister, but abandoned the clergy to be a merchant. He declared bankruptcy in 1692 and became a political writer, journalist, and pamphleteer. Defoe's interests in religion, politics, and trade all came together seamlessly in Robinson Crusoe, and Defoe is considered the father of the English novel. Robinson Crusoe was the first novel written in English to use the prose narrative form. The original desert island narrative, Robinson Crusoe, saw many film adaptations, and itself influenced many other films and television series, including Lost, Castaway, The Martian, and Gilligan's Island. Now, the story is based on the real-life adventures of Scottish sailor Alexander Selkirk, a rebellious adventurer who willingly stranded himself on an island off the coast of Chile in the early 18th century, shortly before the publication of Robinson Crusoe. The novel has a lasting literary legacy, blending a unique prose style with survival narrative, engaging, easy-to-read language, a story of personal growth and Christian values. But it's also a troubling representation of colonialism and racism, and many of Robinson Crusoe's beliefs and actions are influenced by things like cultural domination. And while he grows to care about others in relatable human ways, he also has no qualms with things like taking slaves or killing natives when he sees they're holding a white man hostage, as opposed to his originally thinking they were just brutalizing each other. Moments like these are glimpses into the contexts of the world Robinson Crusoe was written in. At the onset of the novel, narrator and titular protagonist Robinson Crusoe introduces himself and makes it clear he loves adventure at sea. Robinson Crusoe leaves home against his parents' advice, and Moroccan pirates take Crusoe into slavery. Crusoe escapes and travels to Brazil. A shipwreck strands Crusoe on an island en route to Africa, and everyone else aboard is killed. Crusoe lives alone on the island for 23 years. Crusoe rescues a native captive whom he names Friday, and they battle against cannibals who inhabit the nearby mainland. During the action-packed climax, Crusoe helps an English captain whose crew has mutinied and returns to England. Crusoe learns he has made a fortune from his plantation he started back in Brazil, and he embarks on another voyage with Friday and a small crew, this time fighting wild animals in the mountains of France, and even visiting his former beloved island home, seeing a community has sprouted up there, Robinson Crusoe ends with the promise of further adventures, setting up the 2 sequels that would follow. The novel's key symbols, a gun, tools, boats, and Crusoe's island calendar post, all speak to greater themes: self-reliance, civilization, progress, Christianity, and nature. It is the combination of innovative literary narrative and evocative symbolic lessons and virtues and contexts that have seen Robinson Crusoe withstand the test of time for far longer than the decades Crusoe himself spent on the island. The centuries of success can be attributed to a simple tale of adventure that combines many genres with excellent storytelling, and the nearly countless translations and printings of the book, as well as screen adaptations and other stories influenced by Robinson Crusoe, make this, the original English prose novel, a true great of literature.
About Daniel Defoe's work and other authors. 18th century Europe started in the Age of Enlightenment and gradually moved towards Romanticism. In the visual arts, it was a period of Neoclassicism. 18th century period is supposed to be very fertile period in the development of prose work. The writer slowly turned it into reasonable things. The prose was thought to be a good medium in order to express more elaborate ideas and arguments. The early development in journalism also gave rise to prose work to some extent. Daniel Defoe is a good prose writer as well as the first English journalist. He began to publish the early London newspaper, The Review, and ran it for 9 years. He has finally described the Great Plague in London in his Journal of the Plague Year in 1722. Robinson Crusoe is a famous work. It is a story based on real events of a sailor who quarreled with the captain and was left alone on an island for 4 years. According to the period, 2 famous writers as well as journalist Richard Steele and Joseph Addison worked together in publishing the newspaper like Tato and The Spectator. They wrote many famous and good essays on various subjects and published it in their newspaper. They also wrote actions of imaginary characters. Their works, written in pure and simple English, helped much to the development of the novel. So in the development of English novel, their work was bigger. And perhaps Jonathan Swift was the greatest English satirist in that period. That is Jonathan Swift. Jonathan Swift wrote the Battle of the Books in favor of ancient writers. His tale of tube attacks on religious ideas. Swift wrote his famous satire, A Modest Proposal, in order to attack the injustice of English rulers to poverty of Irish people. Also, his well-known work, we consider as Gulliver's Travel, is the most popular satire of Swift. It's very popular among young children as beautiful story. That is all information according to our today's lecture. Thank you for your attention. See you in the next lessons.